Love don't have any place. We're living in times when men commit crimes and crime don't have a face. We live in a political world, icicles hanging down, wedding bells ring and angels sing and clouds cover up the ground. We live in a political world where mercy walks the plank. Life is in mirrors, death disappears up steps to the nearest bank. We live in a political world. Courage is a thing of the past. The houses are haunted, children are one, and the next day could be your last. Live in a political world, one you can see and feel, but there's no one to check, it's all a stacked deck, we all know for sure that's real. We live in a political world, cities are lonesome fear. Little by little you turn in the middle, but you're never sure why you're here. We live in a political world, under the microscope. You can travel anywhere and hang yourself there, you always got more than enough rope. We live in a political world, turning and thrashing about. As soon as you're awake, you're trained to take what looks like the easy way out. He's not welcome at all. Turn away from the door to wander some more, put up against the wall. We live in a political world. Love don't have any place. We're living in times when men commit crimes and crime don't have a face.
Let's welcome to the stage Cami Croft, Amnesty International USA's Deputy Executive Director of Digital and Strategic Communications.
Good morning, Amnesty International USA! Woo! Welcome to our 50th Annual General Meeting and Human Rights Conference. The theme of this year's conference is Moment to Movement. It's about capturing that spark of change that can begin in an instant and reverberate for years. We have a very exciting program planned for you today, including this keynote with our executive director, Stephen Hawkins. Woo! That will talk about how we will take these moments of activism and inspiration and build our movement to realize the social change that we all want to see in this world. You know, I wouldn't be our digital and strategic communications director, and a good one, if I didn't want to spend my time up here giving you guys 5 ways that you can share your moments at this conference today with the rest of the world and online and digitally. So let me give you 5 ways that you guys can do that today. So I want you to be taking out your phones. I want you to be tweeting. I want you to be Facebooking. I want you to be Snapchatting. I want you to be using our hashtag AmnestyM2M. There will be a quiz about that later. I want you to be taking action with our petitions online. I want you to be sharing your moments in our action alley outside of the ballroom. For folks that aren't with us in the room today, you can encourage your friends to join us and watch and observe with our live stream on YouTube. And then, of course, if you aren't already following us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, I want you to do that today. In advance of this, I've asked some very special guests and some of our newest Amnesty members to help us remember our hashtag and share with us some of the best and most, I would say, recent techniques and best practices for selfies. So, here's Gideon. He is perfecting the drool selfie here. Here's Frederica, who's perfecting the mommy selfie. And then I think baby Sadie just really nailed it with her selfie here. And notice that hashtag. I want to thank my Famnesty colleagues, Michelle, Danielle, and of course my husband, for letting me exploit the cuteness of our children to make a shameless social media plug this morning. Because, you know, the only thing that's more popular on the internet these days, more popular than cats, are babies, of course. So I want to give, I want you guys to have fun here today. I want you to share what we're doing here today, but I also want us to remember why we're here. We are here to learn how we can get better at what we do. We are here to get better at our grassroots activism and mobilizing others on the change that we want to see in the world, on protecting people wherever dignity is denied. And I want you to be sharing what's happening here, because we're not only here to protect each other and help make this world a better place for each other, but also folks outside of this room, and of course, for future generations to come as well. So without much further ado, we have some very special international guests with us here today. And I want to start that off by introducing Thomas Schultz-Jagow, who is our Senior Communications and Campaign Director at the International Secretariat, who will talk with us about some of the campaigns that we're working on as a global movement. And then I'll be back on here a little later to introduce some of our other keynote speakers.
Good morning, Brooklyn. Good morning, Amnesty. Well, I can't hear you. Good morning, Amnesty. All right, now we're talking. Now we're talking. You need to make a noise, because what I'm here to talk to you about is the global Amnesty International movement. And while you are here at this moment here in Brooklyn at your national AGM, you need to be reminded and you need to know that there are 7 million of us out there as part of this global Amnesty International movement. 7 million people who are members, supporters, activists, and who are all motivated by the same thing. They're all taking injustice personally, just as each and every one of you takes injustice personally. And we all get out of bed in the morning to campaign to stamp out human rights violations around the world wherever they may occur. And we get out of bed to campaign to mobilize the humanity in everyone to come and join our global human rights movement. Because there is so much work to do. Any kind of news feed you see in the morning will tell you that we must not let up and that we must be tireless in our efforts to strengthen human rights around the world. But of course, we also need to be realistic and understand that we can't be everywhere and work on every single issue that we may see in the news today. So just as you are going through a process to define the strategy for Amnesty International USA, the same efforts are happening on the global stage. We'll meet in August in Dublin in the International Council meeting to vote on and agree the new strategic objectives for our global movement. And you've all participated, hopefully, in the consultation here in this country on what those new strategic objectives can be. And they'll be broad to some extent. We'll look at reclaiming basic freedoms, the right to assembly, the right to free speech. We're going to look at inequality and wherever issues such as poverty turn into human rights violations. We're going to look at conflict. That is so dominant in everybody's mind when you look at what's happening in many parts of the world. And we're going to be looking at accountability so that we can hold states to account where they don't do their part to uphold strong global human rights standards in their own countries. But we're also going to look at ourselves as a global movement, and we will want to make a strong commitment that we want to be even stronger and even bigger. Well, there are 7 million of us now. We can grow that number, and we will rely on people like yourselves who are out there in your schools, in your communities, in your groups, and help convince others to join forces with us and to make this movement even stronger. So with that, I'd like to convey the best wishes from Salil Shetty, our Global Secretary General, and all of us in the International Secretariat in London. We want to thank you for your efforts to make AIUSA strong and a strong and proud part of this global movement. We're counting on you. We're wishing you a great AGM, and we hope that you will leave Brooklyn here today with fresh energy and fresh dedication to this cause of Amnesty International. Thank you so much. So, just to make the point about the global movement, we've got a few friends from Amnesty International Brazil joining us. So let me introduce and call on stage our Director of Amnesty International Brazil, Achila Roque, with two friends who he's going to introduce. Achila.
You see how the Germans are. They beat us 7-1 during the World Cup, and they don't want to introduce me. Come on. They add injury to offense. Amazing. Well, good morning. Bom dia. I can't tell how happy I feel of standing here again since Chicago. That has been an incredible year for all of us. It was an incredible year here in the US. We watch you from Brazil while you stand up against police brutality, when you raise your voice powerfully in the outrageous violations of Ferguson. And we saw you guys and girls moving close to the ground in the US. So that's amazing. So it was very inspiring for us because in many ways, and that's what it means to be one movement. In many ways, you are also addressing very similar issues in Brazil and throughout the Americas. We still have states and security force who are far from recognizing the power of rights and commit an enormous amount of violence. We just launched in Brazil a campaign which will become an international campaign next month, which is Black Youth Alive, Jovem Negro Vivo, which is addressing the issue of high rates of homicide among black people. In the context of this campaign, we're going to be addressing the debate about what security force we need in the context of a democracy. So I think we're going to work a lot together. I'm talking about a country where we have about almost 60,000 people killed every year. Among them, more than 50% are young people between 15 and 29 years old. Among them, 77% are black. That means about 30,000 young people being killed every year, which would be somehow like you crash an airplane every 2 days, full of young people, and that's what's going on there. So, just to keep my time short, I think a lot of what we are doing is about to build trust among local actors, movements, people who are working together with Amnesty in bringing our voice and our movement everywhere. So because of that, I have the honor to have along with me 2 local leaders, 2 national leaders of the movement against homicide and police brutality in the state of Salvador, but also their national leader, Hamilton and Andrea. So I want them, rather than me, to address you a couple of words. So thank you so much, and I will pass to Andrea. Great, Andrea, to have you here.
Good morning.
Bom dia.
Thank you very much, Atila, from the Amnesty, to receive us here. It's very important. We are here to talk about our lives. We are the React or Die campaign, Reaja ou Será Morta, uma campanha pela vida. And we are here to talk about what we are doing in Brazil. We black people are more than 100 million of people in Brazil. But we are living not good times today because we are suffering threats, because we are fighting against what we consider the genocide of black people in Brazil. We fight against the racism. We are in the slums. We are in villas. We are in prisons. We are in our communities, providing the life, promoting rights, and providing things that we need to survive in each day. We, the women that are living in this community, are responsible to generate the life, to protect the life, because all the time the police, the groups, the squads, and all the groups have instruments to finish our life, because we black people are considered enemies in Brazilian territory. Because of this, we have partnerships with organizations, important organizations like the Amnesty, that have guaranteed our lives nowadays, because we are suffering threats, and because the supporting of an organization like Amnesty, we are here today, and we keep alive. Because of this, our campaign is against what we consider the genocide, because in Brazil, to be black people, to be a black person, to be a woman, a black woman, to be a black man, is considered to be an enemy. Because of this, we are here. Because of this, we are participating for the 4th International Pan-Africanist meeting. Because of this, we are representing here black people of Brazil. Thank you very much.
Bom dia.
Good morning.
Em respeito
In respect
ao fortalecimento,
to the strengthening
a consideração e o amor da Anistia Brasil
for the consideration and love of Amnesty Brazil
por nossa luta,
for our fight,
queremos presentear com uma coisa simples,
we would like to give something simple,
mas que é cara pra gente.
but it's expensive to us.
Atila Roque e a toda a Anistia Brasil.
This T-shirt is to Atila Roque and to all Amnesty Brazil.
E queremos entregar também
We would like also
a Anistia Estados Unidos,
to give to Amnesty United States,
a Steve,
to give to Stephen,
e isso vai aparecer para ele depois,
It's going to, he's going to get it later.
a nossa bandeira,
Our flag.
que ela tremule, que ela possa tremer no céu dos Estados Unidos.
That it can be in the winds, in the skies of the United States.
Power and the people.
Thank you so much. We had just made something which is absolutely unbelievable. We finished before the time has been assigned to us. So that's what happened when you ask Brazilian to speak in English. We have become much shorter. So maybe I should take some questions. No, I'm kidding. No, I would like to actually have an honor to invite to the stage my colleague, director from AI Mexico, Perseu. Perseu, together with us in Brazil and the all Americas, we are engaged in this enormous task of building a strong presence of AI in the Americas. So us, Perseu, Steve, we are all together. So please, Perseu, it's great to have you here.
Morning. You sound very tired. Good morning. Yeah, that was good. I want, first of all, to thank Stephen and Margaret for the invitation to this AGM. I would like to say that it is my second US AGM. I was in Chicago last year. And I have to say that it's very re-energizing to be here. It's always to feel all the vibe and to feel all the energy that US activists have. And that's always very, 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 very good. And it's good also because for a Mexican, I feel very warm, even in this very cold New York City, which you may think is not cold, but for me it's freezing. So I am very, very thankful to be here with friends and with colleagues that are fighting for human rights. And while I'm happy to be here, I also want to say that I bring a message to you of sadness and hope at the same time. As you may know, Mexican people, Amnesty Mexico, Mexico as a country, is not doing very well these days. We are going through maybe what it is one of the deepest human rights crises in decades. There is 23,000 people that are disappeared, from which a lot we believe are enforcedly disappeared. You may know as well that Mexico appeared before the UN Committee Against Disappearance, and the UN Committee concluded that disappearance in Mexico was widespread. So did the Special Rapporteur Juan Mendez, who I know you will be hearing from today later. And he also concluded that torture in Mexico was widespread and in a context of impunity. So we have disappearances, torture, extrajudicial executions, just to name some of the human rights violations that are going in the country. And also, this human rights crisis is putting at risk our still very young Mexican democracy. So that democracy that took long time, that took many, many years to build, now is at risk because of the human rights violations that are going on within the country. However, I am also very hopeful, and I bring the message of hope, because Mexican people are awakening. And this is very related to the theme of your AGM, from moment to movement. And so people in Mexico are living this moment and taking conscious and beginning to move, to mobilize in order to stop human rights violations. And I think we can do great, but let me recall one of the principles of Amnesty International, which is international solidarity. And in Mexico, we hope a lot and we expect that the US can do a lot for solving the human rights crisis that is going through Mexico. And when I say the US, I don't mean the US government, I mean the US people. I mean you, Amnesty International, the activists. So I come here to ask for your support. I ask you to mobilize, to support, to raise your voice, and to force the world to know that Mexico is going through a human rights crisis. And I want you to put all the pressure you can so we can get out of this crisis. I know that I'm asking for a lot, but I know that Amnesty likes big challenges, and I know you are part of Amnesty. So that's all I had to say. I had to be very thankful for being here, and I hope you help us overcoming this crisis that we're going in Mexico. Thank you very much.
How's that look? Is that working? All right, guys. Well, I told you there's going to be a quiz. I need your help. What's our hashtag for this conference? Great job. And we're going to take some selfies like, it worked. It's going to take some selfies like that today. If anybody wants to use the selfie stick today, just come on by and grab it from me. At this point, I have the distinct honor to introduce our next speaker, who is Ben Jealous. He is the former president and CEO of the NAACP and currently works as a partner at Capper Capital, an Oakland-based firm that leverages the technology sector to create progressive social change. He's also a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and the chairman of the Southern Elections Fund. During his tenure at the NAACP, Ben focused the organization on voting rights and criminal justice reform and oversaw the launch of several national programs on education, health, and environmental justice. So without much further ado, please let me welcome and give me a grand round of applause, Ben Jealous.
Well, good morning. It's good to be back at the AGM. Got some folks here so new they don't realize before I worked for the NAACP, I worked for Amnesty International USA. I'm here today, though, to introduce my good friend, my old mentor, Steve Hawkins. Steve and I used to joke at the NAACP, we would say, why is it that Amnesty is just like a little cooler than the NAACP? And I always said, brother, I think it's because it started with a call to action that went out from a bar. 2 Portuguese students raising a glass to freedom in 1961. With Steve and I, our relationship has usually been one of me showing up after him. It is impossible to beat Steve Hawkins to work. The one day I thought I did, we were working at the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty back in '97. And I, like most would-be Amnesty staffers, rolled in about 10 a.m., 10:30. And Steve was coming in right behind me. And I said, Steve, I think I finally beat you to work. He's like, yeah, man, I got lost. I got lost in my morning run. I ran 24 miles. And I just looked down at my donut and got back to my desk. You know, for a young activist like I was then, Steve was always a bit of a superhero. He was just a little bit different. The type of guy who could run 24 miles before work and still like walk into the office as if nothing was wrong. He has a work ethic that when you get to know him, you realize was forged as a young child who helped his parents deliver newspapers to put food on the table for his siblings in their neighborhood in the shadow of one of New York State's most notorious prisons. He has a courage that was recognized by the inmates at that prison, where he had first wandered in with the NAACP when he was 14 to figure out how the people in the local community could help them seek justice. This was in that first decade after Attica, when so many in New York State were so aware of the torture that can happen here at home. And then emerged at 16 as the inmates' elected representative to the NAACP and the outside world. A voice cultivated the same way that Thurgood Marshall cultivated his as a young lawyer, crisscrossing the American South on behalf of the wrongfully convicted and those condemned to die. And a capacity for vision to which all of us who have committed our lives to abolishing the death penalty here at home should be grateful. Because I was with him 20 years ago when he stood up to the combined leadership of the American anti-death penalty movement and said, it is time for us to let go of our failed lawyer-led strategies and embrace activist-led strategies and turn this movement around. 20 years ago, we stood in front of the movement and we had nothing but 20 years of failure when it came to abolishing the death penalty in the US. And today, we hold our heads high because we have abolished it for those with low IQ. We have abolished it for juveniles. We have abolished it in states across this country, and most recently, even below the Mason-Dixon in Maryland. And we will abolish it from coast to coast soon enough. And now, in this moment that if we're honest, that when we go to talk to an ambassador, as I did many times at the NAACP, when Steve and I were strategizing, for instance, to figure out how to try to keep Uganda from making being an LGBT person cause for execution. You sit down with those ambassadors, and you know what? If you aren't willing to recognize the human rights abuses here that are broadcast over CNN every day, they really don't want to talk to you. But when they see us, whether it was the campaign to confront human rights abuses in the US in the late 90s after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the end of the Cold War, or it was in our years right after the September 11th attacks when we confronted racial profiling against South Asians and Muslims and Arabs here in our own country. Or it's today from Ferguson to Long Island, where we're saying it is time for us to stop extrajudicial killing in the streets of our country. It is time for us to end racial profiling here at home. It is time for us once and for all to put an end not just to the death penalty, but to mass incarceration. In other words, when you can sit in front of that ambassador and assure them that nobody, not even the US of A, gets a free pass from Amnesty International USA. Then they know that they have to listen to you, that they can't dismiss you as an entitled American who is blind to its nation's own flaws. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you my friend, my mentor, and our leader, Steve Hawkins, the man who is leading us in bringing human rights home with the same humility of those two students in Portugal 54 years ago by simply saying to freedom. God bless.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Thank you all for that warm welcome. And a special thanks to Ben for that gracious introduction. And as Ben was saying, he and I go back many years. I gave Ben his first job out of college, and he's returned the favor by the time that I spent at the NAACP. I can share some stories about Ben, but I will hold the thought. But it's true. I guess one day I did run about 20 miles before work, but I don't get a chance to do that any longer. My children do though give me a good run for my money. I want to give a thanks to Thomas and Attila for their remarks this morning, and Andrea and Perseo for their great welcoming remarks and joining us here today. And I want to extend a special welcome and thanks to my staff and to my board and to our volunteers who have helped to make this great conference possible. And I ask, will the board and the staff and the volunteers please stand? Thank you. Now, I also want to do a special thanks to our member leaders. Will you please stand? You all know who you are. Please keep standing, because it is through you all that we are able to shine a light on human rights abuses around the world. It's through you all that we're able to do the work that we've been able to do around the Stop Torture campaign and around my body and my rights, and God knows all the other crises that emerge. We would not be able to do the work without our member leaders. Thank you all. And of course, I saw some of our youth activists stand, but I also want to give some special recognition to our members of NIAC, our National Youth Advisory Council, and all the young people whose work over the course of this conference, for sending us with the spirit across the Brooklyn Bridge yesterday. I thank you all. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank my family, whose love and support helps me make it through each day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So my friends, welcome to Brooklyn. Who is a Brooklyn in the house? There's Brooklyn. Now, very good. Now I lived in Brooklyn twice in my life, once in Park Slope and once in Bed-Stuy, and I won't debate here which is the better place to live, but I do know Brooklyn. And the last time I checked, the amnesty flag was flying high above Borough Hall. So welcome all to this 50th annual meeting of Amnesty International USA, a celebration that I am so pleased to be sharing with all of you here today. Now, just 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to mark another celebration of 50 years when I stood at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. I was there with President Obama, members of Congress, thousands of activists who had come to town, our own delegation. But the star of that day was 105-year-old Juanita Boynton, who had been on that bridge back in March of 1965. Now, as the story goes, President Obama, when he went to give his speech in Selma, leaned over and talked to Juanita and said, you know, I'm so happy to be here, to be meeting you, to be our nation's first black president. Is there anything that you would like me to say, particular in my speech? And Miss Juanita looked at the president and said, you better give a good one. Sort of a message to me there today. So Miss Juanita She stood on that bridge in '65, she and other Americans, and they were savagely beaten that day. But they were determined to peacefully challenge the denial of their right to participate in our political system. I stood there reminded of the human toll, of the blood and the broken bones and even death that has been paid by so many so that human rights can be enjoyed for us all. I was reminded that Selma was a defining moment in our nation, a nation soiled with racism, plagued by the vestiges of slavery, and that for years had denied human dignity to many of her citizens. Women and men, young and old, hailing from every corner of America, dared with their actions to make a bold statement that would capture the attention of the world and inspire generations to come on that day in Selma. And much like the poignant moments throughout our history, their very presence was a stark reminder that human dignity and justice was not just an ideal, but that something very, very real, something tangible, something that belonged to every human being. And on that day, in March of '65, their words and actions would serve as a symbol of how a moment can be transformed into a movement. There you go. You see, what happened in Selma was indeed felt around the world, for it was Selma that led longtime friends of Amnesty, the band U2, to write their classic song, Bloody Sunday. And it was Selma that has inspired Amnesty's new friends, John Legend and Common, to write their Oscar-winning song, Glory. And standing in that historic place 2 weeks ago, I was reminded that progress doesn't just happen. Movements don't just happen, but brave men and women and children committed to human rights and human dignity make change happen. But we know that the work of Selma, my friends, is not done. Because sadly, after all these years, while much has changed, much still remains to be done. There is still a class of Americans who are denied their right to political participation and human dignity. And I am talking here about the 6 million people, nearly 6 million people, who are coming out of prison with a felony conviction and are denied the right to franchise. Think about it, 6 million Americans. Think about the size of that number. If we were to gather those people in one place, it would be the second largest city in the country. More than the population of Los Angeles, more than double that of Chicago. For these people, the promise of Selma has not been realized, and it is imperative that their continued struggle for human dignity be embraced by Amnesty International. That is the work before us. My friends, when I stood before you last year at this time, I told you of my vision to bring human rights home. I said that if we truly believed that human rights were universal and indivisible, that Amnesty then had to support the victims of human rights abuses, not only around the world, but also here back home. And I would say that our work over this past year has been supportive of that vision. For we have responded when schoolgirls in Nigeria were abducted by Boko Haram. We used our social media to mobilize and make millions of people aware of their plight. We petitioned for the release of Carmen Vasquez, who was imprisoned in El Salvador for a miscarriage under that country's harsh abortion laws. We came to the defense of Raif Badawi in Saudi Arabia because we know that blogging is not a crime and no one should be subjected to cruel and inhumane punishment for simply telling the truth. We championed the plight of torture survivors in Mexico, where Angel Colon was released after being subjected to 5 years in pretrial detention, and where Claudia Medina finally was cleared of all charges. There you go. But in addition, our global campaign against torture was also brought home. In Chicago, Amnesty demanded reparations for more than 100 black and brown men who were tortured by the police. And a year ago, when we were in Chicago, only 2 out of 50 Chicago aldermen had signed on to our call for reparations for these victims. But today, I am proud to tell you that we have garnered the support of 29 members of the Chicago City Council. A majority of the City Council now stands with us. And we will continue always to call torture for what it is, wherever it happens, whenever it happens. And I am also, of course, reminded of this past summer of the human rights crisis that emerged in Ferguson, Missouri. And there in Ferguson, we broke some new ground for us as a movement, because we did not simply document the human rights crisis, but we actually experienced and lived it in Ferguson. I was there with our field organizers, with our communication staff, and with our members. And we came in respecting the community, and with that we met people like Netta Elzie and Larry Fellows, 2 incredible youth activists who I am proud to say are now part of our staff. And when we arrived in Ferguson, we found that the air there was not only filled with the stench of tear gas, but we also found that that air was filled with the defiance of a people who had had enough. No longer were they going to tolerate deaths of their loved ones at the hands of the police. No longer were they willing to accept the lack of accountability. You know, I simply could not have anticipated that when I spoke a year ago about bringing human rights home, that we would find ourselves standing with community members as they face down tanks in America's heartland, but we did. And as people saw our yellow t-shirts in Ferguson, they would ask the question, "Who are you?" And we introduced them to Amnesty International for the first time, explaining that we were there to make sure that the eyes of the world were there as well. And indeed, the world was watching, as we heard yesterday Mabel talk about watching observers in Ferguson and how that inspired the Amnesty staff in Hong Kong to do the same for their youth-led protests there. That moment in Ferguson helped us to ignite a movement that we have seen across the country in support of what I consider a fundamental human right, and that is that Black lives matter. Thank you. And I know that Amnesty has a vital role to play in this movement, for we see the militarization of police across the Americas. And we can make links that help connect what is happening here to what is happening in other parts of the world, such as in Brazil, where our colleagues will tell us there are 100 Mike Browns killed every month by the police. We must find a way to link our causes, and Amnesty will do that, I'm sure. I began today talking about the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And just for you all's knowledge, Edmund Pettus was a Southern senator, a Grand Wizard in the Ku Klux Klan. Why they have not renamed the bridge, I do not know. But what's important to remember is, yes, that bridge was crossed on Bloody Sunday by people like Juanita Boynton, but it also was symbolically built as well by a nation that needed to move from its history of racial oppression into a future of equality and acceptance. As with Selma, we too are faced with a critical moment as we mark 50 years of coming together to advance human rights. We must determine what kind of bridge are we going to build that will take us from our past to our future. How are we going to define and shape amnesty over the next 50 years? My friends, I say to you today that we must build a bridge that is strong enough and wide enough to carry us forward. We must build a bridge to our youth and give them the room to serve as leaders in this great institution. We must build a bridge that responds to the issues and the crises of our day, keeping us bold and relevant. We must build a bridge that connects us to communities on the margin, to our brothers and sisters in the labor movement, to our trans family that is fighting for gender self-determination and their very lives. This is the bridge we must build. That bridge that we build at Amnesty should be one that is sustainable, that gives passionate activists a home. We must build bridges that can carry a moment and turn it into a movement. And if you are willing to build that bridge with me, I ask you to please stand today. Who's going to build that bridge with me? Join us. Join us for building a bridge to justice. Join us for building a bridge to freedom. Join us for building bridges for prisoners of conscience. Join us for building bridges to migrant families and asylum seekers around the world. Join us for building bridges for those whose voices have been repressed. And join us for building bridges for all that want to join us in this fight to protect people wherever freedom, justice, truth, and dignity are denied. I look forward to building that bridge with you. I am proud to be your executive director, and welcome to this conference. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
So, Steve, I'm going to have you stay here.
Oh, okay.
Because our friends in Brazil would like to acknowledge your leadership from the past year and share a mini celebration or award for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda.
Stop from side.
Got it. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, that's, as Hamilton has mentioned before, that's the banner of the movement. It's a very important symbol for the people, for the movement in Brazil. So it's really, I feel very moved to see them offer that to Steve today in a recognition of our alliance, our common struggles, to the fact that Black lives matter, and we are together in this struggle here and in Brazil and in the world. So thanks so much, Steve. Great to have you here, to have me here.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great conference this weekend. Our program sessions kick off at 11 a.m. So you guys have a little bit of time to check out Action Alley, share your moments with our Instagram station, and we'll see you in our program sessions at 11.